Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Dave Emmons Show. And twice a week, we have experts and interesting people, in which I've had this person on before. And I want to cover a little bit, say something about the experiencers. I know that we have a lot of people who are naysayers and everything, but I would like for the experiencers to come forward. I would like to take people in that are new and express their stories and get it out there to the public because we need this for disclosure. The person we have on today is he's excellent in every different way. He's a I mean, his name is Mark Olly, and he's internationally recognized author, TV producer, presenter, writer, lecturer, broadcaster, musician, and artist. He's a drummer with a band called Copperworm, and they open for the Stones. I mean, the real Stones, the Rolling Stones. Uh, so there could be another band called Stones. I don't know, Mark, but the Rolling.
No, we definitely didn't do the Rolling Stones because we're not that old. Oh dear.
But he's also a visiting lecturer at Wilmslow Guild and the University of Chester, heads up his own archaeological unit, and runs a DVD production and props company. Myth Company is what it's called. He lives in the UK, and he does his own record producing. He does his own production. He's a brilliant guy. He's an archaeologist, and he does his own. He's a man that he walks the walk and talks the talk also, but he's boots on the ground type of guy. And we're going to be talking today, and we want to give a shout out to Philip Mantle, the Flying Disc Press. He's a great buddy and a great guy for disclosure of the UFO subject. He should be one that should be recognized also, along with Mark Olly. Yeah, there's Mark's book, The Flying Disc Press, and there, yes.
Philip,
there we
go.
Okay, and he's publishing Mark's first, not the first book. He's got about 9 books, I believe it is right now. Yeah, and but he published a book on Merlin, King Arthur, and that's what we're going to talk about first. But then we're going to get into some UFOs and a little green guy, and also some other disappearing Ninth Legion. We're going to get into a lot of mystical stuff in Merlin. And Mark, you got a new book that'll be coming out towards the end of the year, and it's about UFOs. And Philip Mantle, Flying Disc Press, I believe, is going to do that book, and he's going to preview this because it's not going to be released until probably towards the end of the year. Go ahead and show the cover there, Mike. And
are you ready? Ready for this? Here it comes.
Yes.
Absolute world exclusive, because I've only had this a few days, but here it comes. We're still messing with the artwork, but it's called Europe's Roswell, 40 years since impact. Okay, yeah. And this is the point where you get introduced to my cat. Here's my kitty cat. He's going worldwide. So he always seems to know just that precise moment when you're on camera. So there you go. It's not actually out, I don't think, till August. We're still kicking about some of the design work and what have you. But this is an absolute belter. So I'm quite delighted to exclusively talk to you about this and start the ball rolling. So there you go. That's the new one.
Hey, the cat is actually he's kind of like you. You're a musician, and you're on stage a lot, so you get a lot of attention. And you're a drummer, and I'm really, and you're going to have an album, I guess, released before long. That really makes me jealous. I've been playing music 45 years. I've never released an album or never got as close as you guys are. And actually, for all your life doing this stuff and doing a little bit of everything, I admire that. And I told you that a while ago that that I think you're a great guy, but also you're eligible.
The new album, I think that's going to be out. I think we're in March now. I think it's coming out the first week in April, and it's called Pilot. And the band's called Copperworm, and you can get it on all the platforms. So you can download tracks on things like Spotify, etc. There's one up there now. I think there's one track already gone up. I'm not sure which one it is. I think it's Get Me Out of Here, which is the first single released from the album. So that's going to start tumbling into the frame in the next few months. So there we go. That's got that advert out of the way anyway.
And you play a very progressive, hard driving rock. And you're you're a drummer, and as drummers talk, you utilize a double kick every once in a while. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's interesting because I've done all the heavy metal stuff and the thrash and all that kind of stuff, and it's a bit weird now because the new music's more progressive. So
Right.
what I'm doing is every now and again I'm dropping it in, so people will be like, "Oh, this sounds a bit like whatever Cream or Led Zeppelin something." Next minute, boom, in it goes. So
But I admire you. You don't stop, and that's great. Now let's get into this Merlin and also King Arthur. You have the cover of the book you want to show, and then
well,
we're going
this
to get
this
into
is
talk.
this is the big fella.
Yeah,
Here we
that's
go.
it's
It's
Chronicon.
Polychronicon of Merlin, Joseph, and Arthur. This is well, it's amazing. It's took me 45 years to do it, and finally, good hats off to Philip Mantle for finally publishing it. So it's
Yeah.
finally out. It's 488 pages, so it's not as big as the Bible or War and Peace or anything like that. But and it's an easy read. I've got to say, it's written, loads of photographs, and it's written in a real easy to read way. And it's the entire history of the whole Arthur legend, including Merlin, obviously, Joseph of Arimathea, who is the Holy Grail, and Arthur himself and all of his knights and all of the characters associated with that, written in chronological order. So that's what Polychronicon is. So when you start to put things in date order, which is what us archaeologists tend to do, boy, does it start to make sense. So if you really, really, really want to know the truth and you want to go back to the earliest sources and look at the oldest evidence in a logical, easy to understand, progressive way, a friend of mine got stuck in and he managed to read this at a leisurely pace over the period of about a week. And the hardback's gorgeous. I mean, this Philip says it's one of the nicest books he's put out. So if you get a chance to get the hardback, we don't get as much money off the hardbacks, but I don't care. It's a really good product. So order it, click and collect off Amazon. It comes through your door a few days later. I can't say exactly what the Amazon price is, and it'll be different in dollars anyway. But there you go. So it's an absolute humdinger. Did I do that? No, I didn't.
I love the cover. I love the cover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's people will probably ask about this, but Merlin is the guy on this side, obviously with the dog and the bird on his shoulder, and that's pretty much what he would have looked like because that's based on archaeology. The middle one, that's Arthur. We have less information for him, but that's based on all that we know about him. And the guy over this side with the little Holy Grail down here, that's Joseph of Arimathea, and he's holding the Welsh version of the Holy Grail, which is the blood and the sweat of Christ. So you've got the three main characters, as it were, in superhero pose there on the cover. So,
okay, wow,
go buy the book.
Yeah, that's great and all the work, and that's a big book. Also, I mean, it takes a lot of work, and I know what writing is all about now. After starting just a year or so ago, I'm a Johnny come lately. I think Mark Olly. I mean. It's fascinating. You want to get into this, I guess King Arthur will spin off in him. You were on the show here about a month ago, and a lot of people I think liked what you had to say about this historical stuff about King Arthur and Merlin. I want to get into Merlin too and the mysticism. King Arthur. Now, I think I remember last time we got in, you said that King Arthur wasn't really a king. He was a general.
Yeah, essentially he's known as Dux Bellorum, which is Duke of Battles. So he's basically a battle chieftain. So you've got to kind of think more Dark Ages. You're at the end of the Roman period. There's no united British Isles with a united king as such. They have sort of petty kings that rule out of hill forts. So it's very feudal in the way it's doing what it's doing. Wales at this point, North Wales, has got 4 of these feudal lords plus a king, and he's one of those feudal lords. We think it's Melgwyn Gwynedd that was probably the king that he was under, but the kings don't go out and fight. They don't go out and do that. They're sort of off doing their own kingly things. Arthur is the Duke of Battles. He's essentially a warlord, but he does rule a territory. He has a fair sizable chunk of North Wales as his territory, and he comes from the royal house of the Clyne Peninsula, which, as you look at Wales, Wales looks a bit like a pig's face, and it's the bit that sticks out that's the ear with Anglesey. It's kind of, that's the Clyde Peninsula. That's the area that his family originates from. So you guys can all get on Google Earth like that and go, I wonder where that is. Go and have a look at the Clyde Peninsula in North Wales.
Right.
That's where you will find him.
King Arthur wasn't mystical, was he? He was just a really battle-proven type of officer. Did he have a connection with Merlin? And how long did Merlin live? I think we might have mentioned that before.
Okay, I'll go into some detail. The Celtic society that he was born into, or the post-Roman society he was born into, had military people that had military functions, and then they also had bards, ovates, and druids, which is the mystical and the magical side, and to some extent what we'd call science today. That's a different side to society. So they're two different sets of people. And at this point in time, people that have aspirations to be rulers are collecting around them people from the other class of society. So you don't just have to have your military and your might and your generals and all that side of it. You've also got to have your spiritual side of it, cultural, etc. So basically the pair of them get together and they form a complete ruling unit, if you like. But funnily enough, the Merlins, because there are more than one Merlins, there are quite a few of them. There's Merlin Taliesin's the first one. He's in the early 400s. Merlin Ambrosius, who is Arthur's dad's brother, he gets the title of Merlin. He's the next one. He's kind of mid to late 400s. Merlin Le Logan, that's Welsh for dear friend. He's the guy that everybody associates with Arthur. He's like this fairly doddering old chap. The reason for that is, as you say, he lived probably to about 103, which is a colossal age. It's not impossible, but it's a colossal age before he hands over to Merlin Willet, which is Merlin the Mad. Merlin Le Logan sees the rise of Arthur and sees everything kind of, go all nice and sweet and peachy. Whereas the other guy, Merlin Willet, he sees civil war breaking out after Arthur. He survives past Arthur and he goes slowly crazy and ends up in Cumbria, which is on the Scottish borders, and goes mad. And then the last Merlin I've got is a guy called Merlin Tortugan, and that's the area he's in. He's up in the Scottish borders. So it's clearly a title. And it clearly transfers to whoever is the most prominent person at that time living. So that would be a sort of a chief bard, if you like, a chief druid. And then it fizzles out after about 200 years. So they're there right from 400 AD right through to just after 600 AD. It fizzles out because of the Anglo-Saxons, because the Anglo-Saxons don't have Merlins. They don't even have a concept of a Merlin. They don't know what one is. Because it is a uniquely Celtic Welsh position. And it's a survivor from probably going all the way back to the Bronze Age. The Druids, bards, ovates, scientists, teachers, philosophers of Europe formed the basis that those Merlins move forward on. So that's the guys you're actually talking about. But there's two of them. There's two of them during Arthur's lifetime. And the turning point, the hinge, is the Battle of Badon. So as soon as Arthur beats the Saxons and becomes victorious, Merlin Le Logan, the first guy, just thinks, well, now's the time to duck out. And that's his point to die, as it were. So within a few years of Badon, he's passed away. Unfortunately, the other Merlin gets to see the defeat at the end. He gets to see the Battle of Camlan and then the civil war that follows. So that's a bit of a sad end. But no, there's nothing spiritual really about Arthur. He's just a typical ruler doing what typical rulers do,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got to remind the audience that we've done a show a month or so ago, and we talked about your book, and what we're doing, recapping in order to get into the mysticism about Merlin, because I was presented by another scientist. I don't know if he would. I say Mike. I'll give him a shout out, Mike. But at that, and he talks about Merlin quite a bit. Very sharp. Very. He's in the UK. He's not too far from you, but very smart guy. And he talks about Merlin as being mystical, and he could. Is there a chance that this Merlin? I think I might have asked you before that he could have been some type of extraterrestrial or some kind of mystical guy, Mark?
I've got to say, I have been looking at the Arthur legend to see if there is any kind of shall we say, off-planet connections of any kind, extraterrestrial, and it's just not. It's not there in the thread of those stories, not in a way that we can grasp, we can try and project our beliefs and what's happening in our centuries. We can try and project that backwards, but it doesn't sit comfortably with the Arthur material. That doesn't rule out the possibility in the sort of biblical sense that people like Merlin and other mystics of that time, that period, might have thought of the idea of communicating with angels, or with other spirit beings that they were aware of. Certainly the Celts were absolutely, famous, renowned for nature worship, worshipping the powers of the planet. They saw a lot of things like star alignments, eclipses, thunderstorms, etc., as omens and portents. And, even the Ovates were reading those sort of things as signs and, to guide them. So far from not being spiritual in a sort of modern sense, quite the opposite. They were extraordinarily spiritual, scientific, and, calculated in the way they read the planet around them in ways that we probably can't imagine. They just did it differently, Yeah.
There's been intelligence races and civilizations way before us. I mean, they're talking like millions of years back. We've been here and we've gone and we come back, we've gone as human race. Some people may not agree with that, but after looking at a lot of the science and piecing the puzzles together, I'm starting to feel that way, that this is not our first rodeo here on this planet.
No, you're definitely not alone in that, not by a long shot.
But I tell people that we're recording the show on March 10th, 2023, and don't get the other show mixed up with this one, but we're just recapping a little bit. Now these three Merlins, do you think that they could have been blood related, or did they pass down the magic, whatever?
No, actually, well, like I said, there's 6 of them in all, and out of the 6 that I managed to find, none of them have any relationship to each other. It's interesting because the first one, Taliesin, is a poet. He's a bard and a poet, so he must have been a pretty jolly good bard and poet. The second one, Ambrosius, is extremely spiritual. He's almost like an early Christian Gnostic, but at the same time is also a military leader. So he's different again. The third one is the one we imagine as the elderly guy with all the wisdom and, the knowledge and the know-how. So he's more or less a philosopher as well as a studier of natural science. The third one is an astrologer. He's a guy that really has his eyes on the stars and on the skies, but he's different again. And he's got quite an unstable personality. The last one, you back to a poet again, because the last one of them, Tatugan, is a poet. And then I say 6 because there's a possibility that actually the title moved across to Ireland. And there's one guy over in Ireland as well who, I can't remember his name, Bucklebard or Bucklebeard or something, Buchenbeard. I can't remember exactly, but there's an Irish guy who is also a poet. So overall, I suppose the common denominator is poetic literature. They must all have been people who read and studied, but they all had the specialities. They were all quite different, totally different backgrounds as well. Taliesin was an orphan who was adopted. Ambrosius, military leader, brother to Uther Pendragon. The next Merlin, old guy born in South Wales to a nun. The next one, Merlin the Mad, he had a twin sister and he lived up in Cumbria. He was born as a Briton in the Old North. The last one, Tatugan, we don't know anything about him at all because by that point everything's fading out. So they are quite different. It's a title obviously based on ability, knowledge, and position. So if those 3 things come together and you're the right guy in the right place at the right time, you get the title. They must have really had to work at it. I mean, you used to have to be over 21 to be a druid, and some of these people started when they were in single figures, when they were like 7 years old, 6 years old. They were being trained, so it was a lifetime commitment to becoming a Merlin. I would hazard a guess that some of them probably did have quite strong spiritual abilities. If you study the stars, for example, if you know there's an eclipse coming, you could just wander down to the local chieftain and go, behold, I black out the sun. Blackness, because it's not magic. I mean, it's magic if you don't know what they're doing, but it's not magic as we would understand it. You're not sticking your staff up and raising a dragon. It's not like that.
Yeah.
But they knew so much that they appeared magical. They were healers, they were poets and bards, they knew history, they knew sciences, they knew tides and signs and seasons and what's going on in the heavens. You're talking about some pretty mighty guys, with no distractions, no mobile phones, no internet, no television, none of that. These guys just studied the world and the society that they lived in. And they had the right to be called Merlin. They got that title as a result of that. But no, there's no biological connection, and they are quite different in personality.
Now, Mark, the Druids also are attributed to Stonehenge and other buildings that go back thousands of years. Were the Druids around for a long time? Oh, the cap. You see me with the cap now. I'm hiding the bald head. It's too bright for the camera. But I wish I had hair like you. I'm just a little bit older, but my guts, you're holding your own with your hair. Great.
Yeah. What's left of it? Yeah, I'm just about hanging on here. It's like it's all slipped. You see, it's fallen off here and it's all gone, and it's gone round here now. I got the idea off ZZ Top, so what can I say?
You're a rocker. You'll live on. You'll live on. Okay, now let's get into Joseph of Arimathea. And you tie all these three together. And you mentioned that the Holy Grail is the blood and sweat of Christ. Now, I know you do research in archaeology. Did you really confirm that that's the Holy Grail? There's a lot of arguments on what the Holy Grail really is, Mark.
Okay, well, there's a story here. So I'm going to jump in because you missed a point out going back. Druids. The Druids are a good place to start in answering your question.
All right.
Because the Druids effectively have origins going all the way back into the Bronze Age. So you're looking at 1000 to 2000 BC. So things like the Nebra sky disk and things like that show you the beginnings of Druidry. So they start in the Bronze Age. They go all the way through, the Iron Age. They go through the Greek and Roman period. The Romans said that they were Pythagoreans. So they studied Pythagoras. Mm-hmm. So what you're talking about here is you're talking like a pre-biblical religion that is on a par with, let's say, the Old Testament. So the Old Testament in the Bible is the same time period, really, as the Druids are around. Which means that Merlin's religion is probably 2,500 to 3,000 years old by the time Merlin's there. In the days of Arthur, he's got a huge, great, long trail of stuff behind him that he can rely on. The next religion then effectively that comes along and joins the foray is Christianity. Now, Christianity, as I say, has got the same origins in the BC period going all the way back into the Old Testament, but there's an awful lot in common between what becomes Christianity, early Christianity, and what ends up being very late period Druidry. Mm-hmm. And this all comes together, in the first century. Now, the first century, obviously, it kicks off, around about 36 AD. Jesus is crucified. They all get scattered. Joseph of Arimathea goes on the run because he's being hunted down as a religious dissident. The Romans hate Christians, so he's public enemy number one. The funny thing is, the Romans equally hate Druids, because Druids are political dissidents and they're trying to get the Celts to rise up and fight back, so they're kind of warmongering these Druids. So you couldn't be a Roman citizen if you were either. If you're a Christian or a Druid, you've had it. So you get to this country, Joseph of Arimathea lands here. According to the records, he had 12 other people with him, including a couple of the Marys, a few of the disciples, etc. They're basically trying to get as far away from the Middle East as they can. So if you get any further than Britain, you drop into the Atlantic. So this is as far away as they can get from Roman authority. And he brings with him, according to the Arthurian Welsh legends, the blood and the sweat of Christ. That's how it all begins. Now, this is where we now go into the biblical stuff, because at the end of the day, there's two places where you could get a grail. If you wanted to go and get a grail, either it had something to do with the crucifixion. So you got things like the robe, the crown of thorns, the spear that pierced the side of Christ, the nails, the signboard, fragments of the true cross, etc., etc. So you could have that. They could all be grails. Or you can go the other way and you can go to the Last Supper. and it's thought that the Last Supper had connections to Joseph. Joseph, possibly, it was his house, or the upper room was possibly his room, which meant that they used his dining service. That's the upshot of that. So things like plates, bowls, stone cups, wine ewers, anything that was used at the Last Supper, that becomes a relic. So the relic, the Holy Grail, the Sang Graal, which is Viking for Sang is the, Graal is Grail, the Grail, is one of those stone cups. It's the cup that Christ used, or it's the cup of the disciples. Both of those cups ended up in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. So that effectively, if you want to nail a grail, as it were, that's what that is.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted to spiritualize it, the grail goes way, way back into the BC period, because you've got this thing with Melchizedek meeting Abraham. Abraham tithes 10% of his possessions to Melchizedek. Melchizedek gets out the bread and the wine, and he's the priest king of Salem, which is Jerusalem, and this is taking place probably towards the end of the second millennium BC. So that's bread and the wine. Now, as an archaeologist, I know that you have cups, you have vessels, you have clay pottery in which they put a grain-based substance, so it's like porridge or gruel or bread in milk, into this thing, and they flavored it with alcohol, which is either fermented grapes, fermented apples, or fermented honey. Now, that's prehistoric. You know, you're going back to Neolithic times, you're thousands of years BC. Fast forward a couple of thousand years, that's exactly what Jesus is doing at the Last Supper. He's going, guess what? Alcohol and bread. Okay, fast forward another 1,000 years to the time that they're writing down the Arthurian legends. The Vikings on their ships had stone bowls in which they put grain and porridge flavored with alcohol. It's the same. And the Viking word for that bowl is graal. It comes from the word gruel. It's the same root word. So you've got exactly the same contents, the same concept, covering all of that. So although in Wales they were looking for these two cruets, the blood and the sweat, which of course Joseph would have had because he embalmed Christ. He was there at the crucifixion. So he got these two cruets, and they're the Welsh equivalent to the grails. The grail, the big one, are these two cups. Now then, medieval times. Let's bring it slightly more up to date. It does create a bit of a problem, because in the medieval legends, the keeping of the bread and the wine, which is a mystery, because remember, nobody can read the Bible in medieval times. It's not available. You have to be in monastic orders to get access to that sort of thing. So the bread and the wine is really mystical. It basically, what it means is that every single church has a grail, because they have the communion chalices. They're all grails. Right. So that really, really muddies the water. Do you know what I'm saying? It really makes a complete mess of things. So that's where you get this idea of this amazing glowing chalice, you know what I mean, that, you know, has all these amazing qualities, and it turns up all over the place, and some people even think it was grabbed and taken back to heaven. But that's where those problems come from.
Mark, in the Catholic religion, they call it the blood and the body of Christ whenever you take the Eucharist. And is that true? Is that
transubstantiation? Wow, that's what they call it. Do you know, the Catholic Church claims that there is scientific proof that there is some form of transformation. I'm not against miracles. I've seen enough in this life to know that miracles are possible. I'm not sure every time somebody pulls out a wafer and a bottle of red wine, I'm not sure every single time it happens that transubstantiates, but I'm not ruling out the possibility that it could, if you know what I mean. You know, if you have a biblical nature and you try and follow what's in the Bible and you sort of believe that, then miracles are, you know, fairly commonplace. They're expected.
Right. In the Catholic religion, their ceremony is repetitive. I was baptized Catholic, and I went to Catholic church for a while until I got a divorce, and then I go up for the bread and wine, and the priest would smack me on the head. No,
hey, guess what? We've got that in common, because I actually did 3 years at Bible college, and then as I came out of Bible college, qualified as a minister in the Assemblies of God Church, the AOG, I got a divorce. So
And
the whole lot was a big waste of time. I couldn't do
Yeah.
anything with it. So I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, great, all right then.
Yeah.
But I've done my stint in that.
Yeah, I think they've changed
Yeah.
some rules on that too. But uh,
Yeah.
no, we were talking about Christ, and I wrote my third book is coming out for Long Angels and Supernatural Entities, and in there I cover Christ as a shapeshifter,
Okay.
and they said, well, he went up on this mound. And he took Peter, and I think he took his brother James and another James from the disciples, and he stood there and he turned into a glowing white light.
Yeah,
They
transfiguration. Yeah.
transfiguration.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about that? Is it called shapeshifting?
Not in the religious sense. It's like I say, it's one of those things. He's not the only one to do it. It's known to have happened, and it comes from supreme contact with the divine being. I say divine being, God, Yahweh, whatever your view of that is. But if you have massive prolonged contact, you're known to be able to glow. Moses did it. And a couple of other characters in the Bible did it, where they had this amazing glow. And with Jesus being who he was, then obviously that is a super duper version of that. I mean, also people have argued that he's an alien because, he ascended at the ascension and disappeared up through the clouds. But again, what we're doing here is we're struggling with 21st century language. By definition, he's not a normal human being. I mean, that's the whole crux of the story, isn't it? He's a particularly made creature,
like being. Yeah, and Mark, I've been studying this Catholic New Age church. They kind of broke away from the Catholic Church 100 years ago, and there's a reverend. He's a real nice guy, and I communicate with him. And in their doctrine, they talk about Mother Mary being impregnated by two angels, and which could have been ETs, let's say it. And I guess they did some kind of a mystical or miracle on her to create, the seed planted for Jesus. And so Jesus, he was a material human inside, the womb of Mother Mary. And then when he was ready to come out after 9 months or 8 months, whatever, that he dematerialized and come out of her body and was laying on her stomach, and then he would materialize back into a human, and that's why they say she's a Virgin Mary even after Christ's birth. Mark, what you got to say about that?
Right. Okay. Well, I know enough about first century Gnostic writings to say that's nothing new. There are various Gospels, things that were found in Nag Hammadi Library, that cover that as a subject. The gist of what they say, and to some extent it's scientific, is that the female of any particular species actually has the ability to self-fertilize anyway. So that's not unusual. The fact that an angel turns up and goes, hey, guess what's going to happen to you? That doesn't mean the angels went off and had nookie with Mary. That's nonsense. That doesn't wash at all. But it's possible, even science will tell you it's possible, although it's very unusual science, that females of certain species can self-fertilize. So all that would mean in real terms is Jesus has, divine origins, but the same basic DNA as Mary, which means that he's of the line of David because Mary's of the house of David. So there's no problem there. In terms of him being born, the early Gnostics believed that he was born without pain, which takes you back to Genesis, which is how we were born originally. The reason there's pain is because we cocked it all up and got kicked out of the Garden of Eden and this, that, and the other. That's where your pain in childbearing comes. Again, that's not unusual. People do and can today give birth without pain. I know that firsthand, so that can happen. That's not a problem. So out pops Jesus. He comes out naturally. The key to it, the kicker, is once the midwife that was in attendance released the cord, then by miracle, and this is your miracle bit, she was made a virgin again. You don't have to worry about her, popping out by divine cesarean or, transporter beam or whatever. You don't need any of that at all, because God's quite capable of sealing somebody up again anyway. Plus the fact, biology wise, if the woman has nookie with a man. I'm trying to do this so you don't get taken down off YouTube for strange conversations.
Yeah,
but if
copulation or whatever, that's good.
If that happens in nature, then the woman fingerprints on the man. If it's virgin and virgin, then biologically the subtleties of what's going on there creates a fingerprinting. So what they're saying, because remember, they knew more back then to some extent than we know now. What they're saying is Mary had not fingerprinted on a man. There was no man involved in it. Do you know what I mean? It just didn't happen. But there's another kicker as well. I mean, this is taking it even further. If she gives birth to Jesus and Jesus is the one effectively that breaks that virginity, even if the virginity comes back at a later date. If he's the one that does that, then what's happened is they have actually signed a divine contract in blood. Now, Jesus said unreservedly, he said, I fulfill all of the law. That's it. That was Jesus's aim, was to show that it was possible to fulfill all the law. Legally speaking, that means that he's signed a blood covenant with his mum. So we would say, oh, he's married to his own mum, not in the sense that we understand it. What's happened is they're actually covenanted to each other. They are joined. So no, his mum did not have sex with anybody else, didn't go off and reproduce with Joseph and produce hundreds of the brothers and all the rest of it. And the sisters come from other marriages that Joseph had. And that's easily demonstrable. She's still a virgin. He doesn't go off and hump Mary Magdalene and doesn't produce a bloodline. It's all nonsense. That's complete nonsense. The reason they've come up with all that is that it's hiding the truth. And the truth is that they actually stayed together as a couple right to the crucifixion. And you can prove it. I mean, I'll perhaps write a book about this at some point, but you can go through and you can actually prove it. You can use biblical material to prove biblical material. All the laws are there. Everything's there for you to see it. The pair of them stayed together till he died, till he was crucified and went off to heaven. Now then, this is the real kicker. It actually means that the Catholic Church is right, because if he's God and she's married to him, then she's Queen of Heaven. She is actually Queen of Heaven. Yeah. Now, the Catholic Church have known that for 2,000 years. There's just nobody's actually sat down and explained it, because it's a divine mystery. So that they just don't tell you about that. But of course she's Queen of Heaven, because she's married to God. Now, that's not unusual, because certainly in paganism across the world, the god and the goddess, it's not a problem. Of course they marry. So it's a standard formula to people that study divinity, if you look at it that way. But the actual mechanisms of it coming about, the way they did it and all that, people just don't talk about it, which I think is crazy. It's absolutely crackers, because it's there. Oh. Obviously, like I said, it's not something you can easily talk about nowadays on YouTube unless you want to take them down. But
no, not this. Religion and the spiritualism is not a violation. I can tell you the violations, but no. I also heard through a lot of my research that the disciples, they weren't chosen because at random. They were chosen because they were mystical also, and they were pretty clever and pretty intelligent. The 12 disciples, from what I gather, and again, Judah. You get into the Gnostic studies, like you are probably deeper into that than I am. I just went through and did a book, and I cherry picked a lot of these things. So, and it was mostly researched, and I put it together. But I found that the book of Judas and the book of Thomas kind of split from the original Bible that was written in 325 AD. Constantine put together. But Judas in his book, and in Thomas, Judas says that he told the high priest when they wanted to go arrest him, they sent their royal soldiers or their royal guards to go get Jesus. But Judas, when he got the silver, he told him, he says, this is not covered in the Bible, but it's covered in the other books. And so he said, but Jesus shapeshifts, he changes. You won't be able to identify him. And he said that he can be light complected, he can have blonde hair, he can have blue eyes, he can be shorter, he can be taller, and he can wear different clothing. And so they said, well, how are we going to identify him? And Judas says, I will kiss him, and he will be the one to kiss. So that's the reason why I guess, Judas saying that he was the shapeshifter and he changes, and he had to kiss him to identify him. So that's how they did it. What's your take on that, Mark? Is that any of
Well,
that?
I've read both. I've read Thomas and Judas. Judas was the last one I read, actually, so that's quite interesting. Gospel of Judas. There's more radical stuff in both of those gospels than just that. But yes, there is a passage in the regular scriptures. If you look at the regular Bible, you look at the Gospels, there's a passage where there's a crowd and they've gathered and they're being quite abusive towards Jesus, and he just walks through the middle of the crowd. Nobody sees him do it. So it's obvious that one of his abilities, I mean, you think about it, if you can raise people from the dead and you can walk on water and you can feed, 5,000 people with a few loaves and fishes, it's not going to be a problem to make yourself look different. That's, you can do that nowadays, put a hat on, take a hat off, put a blue robe on, then change for a red one. And there's a dozen different things you can do. So it doesn't.
Covering my bald head.
I thought you were a fan of AC/DC, actually, and you were doing a Brian Johnson, but there you go.
I do like AC/DC. Yeah, I love those guys. But no, but there's another story too, Mark, that it's in the Bible, and I got it in my book. It's where Jesus was with some of his disciples in an area, and then they heard that the Roman soldiers were coming there, and they were coming after Jesus. So they told Jesus, they said, we better get you, out of here, and before they get here. So they turned around. He was already gone. He just disappeared, and he dematerialized maybe. And that's what they thought. They thought, the disciples thought, well, what's going on there? He's already gone.
Yeah, that happens a lot. He kind of pops in and pops out quite a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all, after the resurrection, they're all sat in a locked room, trying to debate what's going to happen next. And he just appears in the middle of them. And that's really freaky when he appears, because he has already been crucified when he appears, to them. And good old doubting Thomas says, it's probably not you. You don't look like your usual self. Well, what's he expect him to look like? He's just been beaten up, nailed to pieces of wood, and had a crown of thorns on that. That's the point. He's still got all the injuries, because he says to doubting Thomas, if you don't think it's me, stick your fingers in these holes, stick him in the hole in my side, which makes that story incredibly believable, because it's very down to earth. Jesus is, if you read it in proper language, Jesus is saying, come on then, have a go if you think you're big enough.
He made a mistake too at that time when he went up and he told him, Jesus told him when he went up to show doubting Thomas, and he said they all looked at him like they were afraid of him. And Jesus made a mistake, and he said, it's like you are seeing a ghost. I'm not a ghost. And Jesus did not believe in ghosts. He said that there was no such thing. He said spirits only hang around for a few days to make sure that the body is dead, and then the spirits go to heaven. I believe that's what they're saying. And so look for a book from Mark Olly. I know this is coming. This topic that we're covering right now. He's going to write a book about it. He's prolific. I don't know, but some of these things are in my book also that I'm going to be releasing in a couple of weeks. So that's why I'm talking to Mark about it. He'll probably go into it deeper and wear taller boots when he goes into this thing. And Mark, what is your thoughts on that?
I can feel a follow-up to the King Arthur book coming. I mean, I've tackled quite a few different subjects over the years, and I've had an interest in biblical material now probably for as long as I've been interested in Arthur. So I've been kicking around some ideas. So it's more than likely at some point, maybe next year or the year after, I'll go to Philip and I'll go, right, I know you do UFOs, but you want to do the Bible. And he's just going to go, not again.
I do a little of everything. I covered wars in my second book, and so I jump around. Now I'm doing a sci-fi, ET humanoid book right now, a story book. It's a little different writing. I wanted to get into this while we're talking about the Romans and we're talking about Christ and everything. The disappearing Ninth Legion. You wrote this book early on, 2011, I believe it was, and it's a disappearing Ninth Legion, puts this mysterious Roman legion firmly back on the historic map. What happened there during that?
Okay, well, over in this country, I mean, that's one of the first books I actually published with a new publisher, because I co-wrote it with a friend of mine called John Aspin, and he was a Romanist. So I'm a Celtist, if you like. I do Celts and he does Romans. So different specialisms. So I did the vast majority of the writing, so hence it's one of mine. But yes, the story behind the Ninth Legion, basically they went all the way around the world, as the Roman world, all the way around the Mediterranean, which is what these different legions did. They got stationed till eventually they finish up stationed over here. And when they come over here, they go to Eberacum, which is the place of the U's. So it tells you what they're up to. They moved into this Druid centre up in Yorkshire. That becomes York, the city of York, which we have there now. Somewhere in the early part of the 2nd century, they decide, we think, to pick a fight with a massive tribe over here called the Brigantes. Now, the Brigantes are northern Britain going up into southern Scotland. And what we think happens is that they marched out, never to be seen again. Hence Rosemary Sutcliffe's book, The Eagle of the Ninth. And the idea is that the Romans just disappeared off to Scotland and got battered and nobody ever saw them again. Now, that's just not good enough for me. There's not enough information there for me. So I really got dug into it and tried to find out what was going on. What it appears is that in the spring of 119 AD, they set off for what was then known as Caledonia. So they're going across the country through the Pennines, and they made it up as far as Carlisle, which is roughly speaking one end of what is now Hadrian's Wall, because the wall wasn't there then. And up there, they picked a fight with the Scots. They got battered, and they're still buried up there. So we found the burials for them. What's interesting is the following year, 120, is the emperor himself, Hadrian, comes over here. So you know that something bad's happened. But he puts like a sort of denotice on everything. It's like, no, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to write it down. We're not going to mention anything at all. You know, we lost a shed load of legions out in Germany and we're not having this happen again. It was a disaster, PR disaster. And more than that, 121 to 122, they start building Hadrian's Wall. So you're talking here about a pretty big massacre. You're talking about 10,000 Romans just getting slaughtered in Britain. Which does get a brief mention further on in history. There's a couple of references to that. And then what's left of the Legion gets shipped over to Nijmegen in Holland, and they try and reform it. They try and start it again. And then you get the ghost stories. There's loads of ghost stories relating Romans turning up all over the place, especially in York, in this place called the Treasurer's House in York. So again, we went into great detail and we had a look round York. Now, if you say to anybody anywhere, you just go, oh, York, they'll go, we know all about York. It's the Vikings. So you've got this big thing where York's, you know, Viking this, Viking that, Viking the other. What we wanted to do was put the Romans back in and say, oh, hang on a minute. Whoa, it's a bit older than that. You know, you've had, you know, Constantine the Great was pronounced emperor in York. So, right. you had Emperor Severus was over there. Emperor Hadrian was over there. You know, this is an enormously important, significant Roman site. So that's what that book does. It puts the Romans back in. Now, it's another one of those missing pieces, if you like, of the puzzle, because it's Northern Britain again. You know, if you get into the King Arthur book, if you have a look at that, the capital of Britain ultimately has got to be Chester. You know, it's the biggest Roman fort ever built. It's 11 acres bigger than any other fort ever built. It's got the elliptical building, which is the round table. It's got the biggest Principia, the military complex anywhere outside Rome. It's got a massive bathhouse that becomes a Dark Age chieftain's palace. It's got an enormous amphitheatre, the biggest one in Britain, where they massacred Christians. We think the early martyrs were massacred there. You know, the White City of God with its walls and all the rest of it. Huge, enormous city. But it's in the north. It's in the old north. We effectively had two of them because not only did we have Chester, but we also had York. You know, so we got one on the west coast, one on the east coast. You know, it's like a double whammy. Ultimately, Chester rose to the biggest prominence, but there were times in history when York had, you know, the same kind of prominence. So it kind of ties in. I mean, all these things feed into each other. You know, because you mentioned that one of the other books I did was The Green Man. Well, obviously, in the Arthur legends, you've got Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which is, you know, a monk sitting there basically writing the story of a green man and the tales of a green man set around fertility and, you know, afterlife and resurrection, etc. That's what it's set around. And that eventually finds its way into the Arthurian legends. So there's background material in that as well. You know, if you want to get to grips with the Green Man and what people believed and how that developed through time, that's another one you can go and buy. I'm flogging the lot here, aren't I?
Yeah, Mark, that's Moon Books Publishing, and it was 2016.
Yes, it is.
And revealing the Green Man, and it's an ancient mystery, ancient religion. And then you said something about a cute, chubby face that peered through leaves. Was this it's kind of like a cherubim or whatever,
No, it's if you go around garden centres now, I mean, it annoys me a little bit because you go to a garden centre and there's this wall covered in, cheeky looking, fat, smiling green men covered with leaves and all the rest of it. And most people go, oh, isn't it sweet? I'm going to put one of those in my garden so my garden blossoms, because it's the power of life and this, that, and the other. Most people don't realise that the origins of that is a human sacrifice. The first green man were the Celtic sacrifices that they slashed the throats of and dumped into bogs.
right?
There's this enormously dark side to the green man. And as much as modern day paganism and spirituality has this kind of fluffy bunny opinion of him, and what he is. No, you need to get hold of the book that I've done and track it all the way back. I mean, it's something that, again, Arthurian wise, it's something that Merlin might have, well, more than likely knew about, because it tracks back and it goes all the way back to the Bronze Age, when in fact he's representative of copper, of the solar copper cult, the green man. The green men back then were green painted savages that fought Julius Caesar. They were painted with copper, the metal of the sun. So that's what it goes back to. I mean, I'm only giving you like a whistle stop tour.
Yeah.
I mean, the book's a lot more in the book than this, but again, it's another one of those pieces. If you want to get all the pieces of the puzzle, you could read the King Arthur book and go through that, and yeah, that's fine, that's not a problem. But then if you want to know a bit more about the Green Man and the Green Knight and the background to that, and maybe a bit more of what Merlin would have known, dash out and buy that one on the Green Man, Revealing the Green Man, it's called.
I guess my mind is kind of stopped in the recording. It goes back. I was thinking you was talking about the little green man being a ET or extraterrestrial.
No, they funnily enough, the green man, the chubby face in the leaves and all that, the green man symbol. I never got into the extraterrestrial aspects that might be involved in that, because it's very much an ancient, earthy sort of pagan symbol. But ultimately, I've got to say this, especially having worked with the Ancient Aliens team. So there's a plug. I'm on the one for Crop Circles, right, and a couple of others in the new series. Having worked with that, it's almost possible to project aliens pretty much into anything. I have my own personal view is that the reason you can do it is because in some way we're connected to them. Yes. Mentally, spiritually, biologically, physically, they seem to be almost like a parallel species or another species that has a tremendous amount in common with us. So, yes, of course, you're going to be able to, wind them into the story. I suppose the question with Ancient Aliens is how much of that story does it reveal, about them? About the Ancient Aliens. I found lots of modern day evidence for aliens. There's quite a bit going back probably over the last 500 years for things flying around in the sky, but right. you can't really say what some of them are, but there's no doubt that they go back much further than that. They're not a new phenomena.
Now these I guess these episodes are coming up soon with you in Ancient Aliens.
I think the Crop Circle one's already been broadcast about 4 or 5 weeks ago in the US. Okay. But they go on to repeat players. So you'll be able to repeat it. So if you get the last series, whatever the last series was, might be series 15 or something, I'm not sure. But get the last series of Ancient Aliens. It's the one on Crop Circles. I'm definitely in that. I'm in the one on Obelisks as well. I believe I'm in that one, which I think might still be in production. And then I recorded at least 2 others. So I don't know how many they'll drop me into in the end, but
I tell you what, they couldn't have picked a better guest because you're an archaeologist and you're into UFOs, you're into ancient history, and Mark Olly, look for him in Ancient Aliens in the episodes coming up. And let's get into, I guess, since you've got a UFO book coming out towards the end.
Yeah,
and this is a preview. They're not going to be out until later this year. And so, yeah. And so it's, I have a buddy that's worked on Roswell. There's been a lot of Roswell books, and I guess some of the characters involved in it from the Air Force actually wrote some books. Did you get a chance to talk to them? Some of the, what is this? The Colonel Colonel. He was, he was a Lightbird colonel.
Well, what this book does is, yes, we do. There it is, the famous Roswell newspaper. What we do with this book is we look at the parallels behind a UFO crash that occurred in Wales in 1983, which I was asked to go and investigate, where they actually did manage to recover fragments from the crash UFO. So it's got so many similarities with Roswell, where Roswell, there was a couple of newspaper articles came out, then it was hushed up. In Wales, there was a newspaper article came out, and then it disappeared. Where they cleaned all the debris up and they confiscated all the remains at Roswell, they did exactly the same thing in Wales. They cleaned it all up, they confiscated all the pieces, but they didn't manage to get the bits from the UFO crash recovery team that my mate Gary was on, because he's also principally one of the authors of this, because he's in it. They didn't manage to get his pieces, so those pieces are still current. They're still out there. There was some analysis done on some tiny little beads of metal that archaeologists found on the Roswell crash site many years back. Well, again, some of these fragments are proved to be duralumin, but not a type of duralumin or an alloy that was around in 1983 when this thing came down. And there's lots of other bits of debris that they can't explain. They don't really know what the colouring of it is, or there's like a rubberized coating on it. There's some hexagons on it, hence the hexagon design. These fragments are, I can show you a decent blow up, actually. There's a decent blow up in here somewhere. That's the main thrust of the book, is to actually put into people's hands the evidence that's available, so that you can make your own mind up as to what it might be. There we go. See that there?
Yeah. Right. Do you think those things, those little cubes, do they change shapes, or do they heal themselves if they're damaged? Do they?
No, they definitely don't do that. They're like a sort of green rubbery substance that's attached to the duralumin metal, and what we think they might do is it could almost be a really primitive form of graphene as a structure, where it's possible that you could send electrical signals down it. And the signals, if you had some way of controlling the signals, the entire vehicle would be like one giant circuit board. You could send the energy down through the shell of the vehicle to anywhere. So that was one of my views on what this substance might be. Now, there it is again, the hexagons. It's like a green rubbery substance, and it's on one of the surfaces of the metal. I think I might have an enlargement of that. As I said,
you said there was, Mark, you said there was some analysis done. Did they say it was from this planet or from another planet?
Well, all that we got back was that the metal that it's made of essentially is duralumin, but the other substances, I mean, they were talking thousands of pounds to analyze some of the materials. So it wasn't completed. The analysis wasn't completed. So the jury's out at the moment. Actually, if I show you a big enlargement, there it is. Yeah. There's a big enlargement of part of the hexagons, and you might be able to see that actually it's attached to a sheet of metal. It's only really thin, but you can see they're fascinating structures. But if you really want to get into it, there's just tons of photos in here, and see if I can show you a piece of how thin the material is. There, that shows you. See the guy holding it?
That's an actual piece of the material.
That's So some of these are pieces as well, but that you can see how thin it is there.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I did do a documentary. I did a documentary called Europe's Roswell back in 2008, and I think that might still exist online. You might be able to get it on pay to view. I think it made it onto Amazon Prime. And it's a 1 hour documentary, and you get to see a lot of that material in the documentary. But it was released as a DVD, and as far as I know, you can't get the DVD anymore, so it's a bit of a collector's item. So this is me going back, if you like, 15 years on, 40 years from the crash, going back and re-examining the situation and seeing if anything's come up again in that time period. Mm-hmm. Also, it's an opportunity for me to put my own experiences in print, and the reason why, as a kind of a scientific archaeological type guy, the reason why I'm a believer and why I'm interested in UFOs.
Yeah. Now this metal, Mark, does it contain anti-gravity type
I don't have any of the bigger pieces. The piece I've got's the size of your little fingernail. It's only tiny, because it's very, very, very difficult to break this stuff, to break it up. So the couple of samples that were sent off for analysis that Gary managed to get, he made a couple of key rings out of them and distributed them in case anyone came after his material, which is a brilliant idea. He kind of scattered them around. A couple of people have looked at my sample. And to them, it seems like some kind of extraterrestrial material, extra and terrestrial in the sense that it's been up in the atmosphere. It's been up there. Mm-hmm. Whether up there means it came from outer space, or it came from another dimension, or it just fell from the Van Allen belt like a satellite. I don't know. It's the analysis. It's still open to have that confirmed and done again to try and find out. But people kind of pick up the keyring and they go, "Oh, this feels just like a meteorite." So yeah, people are getting a register off it.
Now, were you able to find these pieces through a metal detector when you went around in the field, Mark?
Well, this is the funny thing. I mean, it's a bit like Roswell. You get to Roswell nowadays, you're down to sieving the sand to try and find micro beads of metal. Well, they did the same job in Wales, because when Gary first contacted me and he said, "Oh, UFO crash, blah blah blah," I'd got this idea of finding something stuck in the ground. Now, by all accounts, like the engine, the cockpit, the pilots, the framework, it should have just crashed. It's lost a huge amount of material when it hit these trees and smashed, and it went everywhere. And I thought you're going to find something, sticking out the ground. But that's not what had happened. This thing broke up. I mean, lost a tremendous amount of material, but could still fly off. It disappeared off, never to be seen again. So, from an archaeological point of view, it went from hopefully we were going to strip the field like you do for an archaeological dig, and then do it properly and go down through the soil and actually see what we could find. There's just absolutely nothing there at all. Yes, we might be able to go back and maybe metal detect and see if anything's been left behind, but honestly, I very much doubt that there's anything on site now. So that was a bit of a killer.
Yeah, so this ship, this UFO, hit the ground, skipped, and then went back up. And do you think other ship could have beamed it back up?
Well, what appears to have happened is it must have come down at some speed, and it must have been in trouble. It hit the top of trees, and apparently you could see where it cut through these trees, about 25 foot wide. Boom. So you can imagine this thing's used to flying around up in the air and in the atmosphere and whatever it does, but it's never hit trees before. So it's coming down slowly, and you've got slow impact from branches. Now, these impacts, the trees smashed like a giant egg, smashed the bottom of this craft to bits. It just knocked loads and loads of sheets of this metal everywhere. It covered 4 farmers' fields with debris. That's a lot of debris. So basically, as it hit the trees, it stripped the bottom off this craft completely, scattered it everywhere. Some of these sheets were 6 foot. So it smashed it to bits. So clearly the craft was designed to move at high speed, not slow speed. So it could deal with high speed impacts, but not with slow speed impacts. But the bulk of the craft must have not had any contact with the ground at all. It must have just missed the ground and then kept going, because it had gone. It wasn't there. And all that was left was the shell, the smashed pieces of the shell. I don't think there was any necessity for a mother craft or a beaming up or anything like that. It flew off. But where it went after that, there's a lot of sightings in Cardigan Bay, which is not too far from where it crashed near Aberystwyth. Things coming up and down out of the bay. They're seen quite regularly. They fly up this way. They come up Wales and up into my area, which is Merseyside. They're seen flying over Liverpool. They're seen flying up and down the Mersey Valley. So clearly they're coming from somewhere in this northern region, this northern area. So my guess is it just went back to wherever it was it came from. I don't think it will have gone into the ocean, because it will have leaked like a sieve, with that amount of debris missing.
Unless you have some kind of a automatic replenishing of or maintenance of their craft that just things fall in place and bead back up. You've seen these movies where these little cubes all get together and then they form a shape, or they fill a hole or patch something. They could have that, but yeah, I guess I was going to ask you about bodies, but apparently it didn't crash. So, what
No.
did the military show up, Mark, after that?
Well, it was reported by the farmer, and he phoned two people. One was he phoned the local MOD because the MOD have got a base, obviously, in Wales. He phoned the MOD and said, is this one of yours? But then he also phoned Gary Rowe, who's North Wales UFO crash investigator. So two teams basically went out there. Now, the MOD got out there like grease lightning. I mean, it says it in the book. It was like a scene from a James Bond movie. You know what I mean? They turned up with lights, trucks. There's plainclothes people ordering uniformed officers around. It was a real proper big deal, and they worked right through the night to clear it all away. So clearly, the military had some idea of what it was and what was going on. But by the following day, or a couple of days later, when Gary got there, the farmer's like, well, I don't think you're going to find anything. But Gary's like, hang on a minute. They're not going to have cleared everything out the forest. There's no way in the middle of the night that they can find all this material in the forest. So that's where their fragments came from. They got into the wood and they found stuff in this wooded copse. They recovered all the bits, said to the farmer, yeah, come on, we'll go back again in a week or two and, we'll have another look and see what we can find. Almost immediately, the Forestry Commission came and just tore the woods down, took it away, cleared the woodland. So they were pretty determined, the authorities, to get rid of whatever was there. But just by sheer luck, Gary managed to get, I think he's got half a dozen pieces in total. And then there's probably about, 20 or 30 or more of these key rings knocking around. And then I don't.
Yeah, the military is not coming and knocking on your doors, right?
Oh, they did. Apparently, he had a visit from the Men in Black. Officially, this is something he told me sort of off camera, which I've chucked in the book. But he said, they turned up, a couple of black, the usual blacked out 4x4s with no number plates on, and the guys in black with the glasses knock on your door and they have incomprehensible military looking passes on them. And they said, can we have our bits back? And he said, no, you can't. And by the way, it's too late because I've distributed all these key rings. He said, if you ever come back here again, I'll tell everybody to release them to the press. So
Mark, did these guys seem robotic, like the typical Men in Black?
Well, I wasn't there. I can only quote what Gary said, and he just literally said, yes, they were the typical Men in Black. Whether or not you regard them as agents of the MOD, agents of the government, aliens, whatever, or some agency like the guys in the movies, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. But he said they turned up, asked for them back, and then they got back in the cars and drove off when they knew that they couldn't do anything about it. Plus the fact Gary does not keep any of this material anywhere near his home, and he won't tell anybody where it's stored, which I think is wise.
Yes, MI6 might come and get it, or some other agency that's interested in that stuff. But yeah, the government is interested in what we're seeing and what we find, because they're curious too. They don't have all the answers. Not all the departments in the military or in the government has all the answers. Maybe some groups do, from what we understand, but then we're getting into conspiracy theories, and that's not good for anybody on social platforms. But there is
a very, very slight little bit of support for that, which came from a friend of mine many, many years ago. A friend of mine joined the military. He was younger than me, and he joined the military as a computer operator. So he had operational clearance for using British military computers. There's two things he tried to do, because this is what you do when you first join the military, and I guess you're a younger man or a teenager or whatever. When he joined the military, the first thing he tried to do was hack into the Vatican archive. So it's like, let's have a look what they've got. I believe he lasted about 30 seconds before they locked him out. So that was that. And then he thought, do you know what else can I do? I'm going to have a nosy and see if I can find anything to do with UFOs. And apparently, British military somewhere down south had a UFO stored in a hangar. Now, everyone out there is going to go, I've heard this story 1,000 times. Yes, it's apocryphal. It's common knowledge that somewhere somebody has one of these things in a hangar. But this guy wasn't the kind of guy who would lie and he had the credentials as well to back up what he was saying, and it was shared. That's why I'm not telling you who he is, because it was shared in confidence, and he just came to me and he just said, look, I just want to build up and firm up a bit the things that are being said, because you're the kind of guy who can take this elsewhere and kind of support it. He was just like, yes, it's not just apocryphal. I've done it myself, and I've kind of been on the terminal and seen this thing that they've got, and it's on military clearance. He's on an intranet. He's on the military's own internal system, and as a hacker, I knew what he was capable of, so no problem him going exploring, internally, and he found something. Again, I no evidence. I've got no printouts. I've got no proof. I can't say anything more than what I've said. That's all I know. But he wasn't the kind of guy to tell lies. So I wasn't going to go into that story, but there you go. I don't think you won't get taken off social media for me telling you that.
No, not for that. I mean, there are things that I don't talk about, and I know that what they don't want, and I don't even want to get into the politics of it. No, do that anymore. But Mark, you got I guess you got involved in another book, Alien Artifacts, Incredible Evidence of Exotic Material from UFO Encounters, and you just explained one of them. And there's several authors involved in this, and this is Zontar Press. And so it has a list here of shocking cases. A manufactured object made of almost pure aluminum that could be more than 250,000 years old. What were you talking about there, or what were they talking about? And I think you narrated, this is on Kindle or whatever, I think, right?
Okay. I only have a vague recollection of this one, so I think it's way before Ancient Aliens days. I'm a big fan of what they call OOPArts, which is the old name for out of place objects, things that shouldn't exist or turn up where they shouldn't be, which is why I hit it off really well with Giorgio and Eric, who do Ancient Aliens. They're alien this, alien that, alien the other. Giorgio's very much into the aliens. I'm the guy with the.
I wish I had his hair. Yeah,
Sophocles. He's brilliant. I wish I had that much hair as well. Actually, mine's all flat, but that's another story. I mean, to be honest with you, Eric's my hero, because the book that Eric von Daniken wrote, Chariot of the Gods, my dad had that on his bookshelf as I was being trained as an archaeologist. So that's where my interest begins, So last year I actually got to meet him. It's an interesting thing, actually, because I said to him, you can imagine this. It's a great story. I'm sat on one side of a table backstage eating me butty, and he's sat next to me eating his butty at dinner time, and I'm looking at him and he's looking at me. Now, I know who Eric von Daniken is. I know he's Chariot of the Gods man, and he's looking at me and he knows that I'm an archaeologist. Now, in the real world, neither of us should get on. Poor old Eric has been attacked so much by mainstream science and mainstream archaeology, and they absolutely hated him for doing Chariot of the Gods. So I'm sat there and I'm thinking, well, what do you say? What do you say to this guy? So I'm chatting to Eric, and I said to him, look, I don't necessarily agree with everything that's in your books, and I don't necessarily agree that it's always aliens. I said, but the thing is, what you did, Eric, was you made us stop and think. You made us look at things differently. I said, you don't, as I was growing up as an archaeologist, you made me question what I was seeing, hence OOPArts and things like that. And Eric, he just looked at me, because he's got this particular, I can't do his accent, but he's got this particular accent. And he just leaned over like, and he looked at me, he went, there are 267 question marks, he said, in Chariot of the Gods. And then he just sat back like that. I thought, that was the whole point of him writing the book. He's just told me why he wrote the book. He wrote that book just simply to make people question. He wasn't telling you what it was. He wasn't saying what he thought the things were, although he did. That's not the point. The point is, he just wanted to make people think. So that's a lovely story, and that leads into OOPArts, because OOPArts make us think. That's really, that's the point he was making, is don't necessarily take everything on face value, and don't necessarily look at objects and look at things and go, oh, they're telling me that's what it is. I mean, as an archaeologist, I struggle with these impossibly long dates. Oh yes, it's that's from just after the Ice Age. It's 450,000 BC, and all of a sudden your head just goes. That's meaningless. It's just completely meaningless. I know you've got a little machine somewhere in a lab, that can do all these fancy things, carbon 14 and all the rest of it. But I'm looking at something of that age. Is probably just a flint rock. You're looking at a flint tool, or you're looking at a piece of wood, or organic remains, or whatever, and that it's almost irrelevant. But it becomes really relevant when you're looking at some of these strange objects. There's vases, necklaces, things made of aluminium, pieces of metal fragments. There's a pipeline running through, I think it's in China, that's hundreds of thousands of years old. There's things turning up in the same layers as dinosaurs. There's I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I could reel off hundreds, if not thousands, of these type of artifacts. Human footprints running across lake beds next to dinosaurs. And you get the reverse of this as well. I mean, there was a triceratops horn found recently. You're not supposed to date these things because you assume that they're millions of years old. But this particular student didn't know that they weren't supposed to date it, so he took it back to the lab, dated this enormous triceratops horn, and it's something like 35,400 BC. Which means, you've got this bloke walking down the road who's, one of our primitive ancestors with a triceratops next to him. Well, that just makes a complete mockery of the whole timescale. And it's happening all the time. There are organic remains of dinosaurs turning up that can't possibly be millions of years old. The preservation processes on planet Earth don't do that. You can't do that. You can't. And the other problem is we've got the reverse of that. You can't date stone. So as soon as something is fossilized, as soon as it's petrified, we've not got a decent, reliable scientific method at the moment of dating those kind of stones. We can't. We can date something that's organic, but you can't date inorganic matter when it's petrified like that. You just can't do it. So there are limits to what we can do.
It's funny that you brought that up.
Yeah.
I'm going to go through this list of artifacts, and I just want to hear about your UFO story also, Mark. But there's a movie coming out, and it's opening up this weekend. I think it's called 65 Million Years. It's where spacecraft with human beings land on the planet, and then they have to fight dinosaurs and survive that. I don't know the rest of the story, but it's interesting how Hollywood or even the UK studios come up with these sci-fi shows that are very interesting, and they have some truth to them. Do you believe that, Mark? Like Spielberg and some of the movies he's had, there's some truth to everything?
Right. Okay. I touch on it in the book that hasn't come out yet. There's like a punchline, if you like. I like to put a punchline in the end of books. So this Europe's Roswell one, I actually have a look at that, and I call it the cone of time, which is where there's a lot of time, a lot of space, and loads of things going on at the beginning of time, and then basically it goes into a funnel, into a cone, if you like. Things devolve. But that presupposes that at some point in the past, you began with everything. So it's a little bit biblical in its outlook, but there's lots of other, mythology that covers it, where basically you have something perfect. And we said it, I think, at the beginning of the tonight's interview. We said, things, start off perfect and then devolve and then go back again and then devolve and then go back again and so on and so on. Well, it's just looking at one phase of that, which I believe we're in, and we're kind of getting down to the bottom of the barrel, the bottom of the funnel now. So looking at that, then there's no reason why any number of different things can be around all at the same time. If you get rid of the evolution thing, Darwin's theory of evolution, which had nothing to do with Darwin, it was something they made up after him. It's nonsense. It's rubbish. It flies in the face of what we know to be true. It's totally unscientific in the modern world. It's rubbish. So if you chuck that one out, you've got to come in with another one. You've got to say, okay, what's the alternative to that? I'm just going to go shoot it's a duck. At the end of the day, everything decays. So you end up with a lot of something that's perfect at the beginning, and you end up with not very much of it at the end that's a bit of a mess. And that's it. It's a law of nature, and that operates over a long period of time. So, yeah, I'm perfectly happy to think that, perhaps we were running around with dinosaurs until relatively recently, till whatever was the last of those particular species died out. I mean, at the end
History
of
as
the
we know it is not really the history that actually occurred. Actually,
no,
there's some scientists saying we're a holograph, we're a matrix, and we live this life off and on, off and on, off and on, and we're back. We recycle, and ETs get involved in some of the DNA, and the what do they call it? The teleces, the
yeah,
things that are at the end of the DNA that were shortened on us, so we
yeah,
wouldn't live as long. I just want to give a list of these. I know it's not your book, but I think you were associated with this
okay,
alien artifacts, incredible evidence, exotic material, in its Kindle edition. I just mentioned off the aluminum thing. There's schoolboys in Japan captured a miniature UFO with strange electronics inside. Never heard that one. The mysterious alien gloves found by a long distance runner in a remote area of Arizona. Well, Arizona's an ET land anyway.
yeah,
I
yeah.
know I've been there. Music legend John Lennon claimed that he was given an egg-like metallic object by alien beings. Now, being a musician, you might know a little bit about that one, right? Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's after he departed from Yoko Ono. They'd split and gone their separate ways, and Yoko Ono was sending one of her associates in to look after Lennon. And needless to say, she hooked up with John. So it's post Yoko relationship stuff that, and they were stood on a balcony. And when they were stood on a balcony, Lennon later claimed he was visited by a full-on close encounters of the third kind, proper lit up, circular UFO, and it came. And this woman that he was with claimed that's what happened, and there were other witnesses. I believe there are illustrations and records of that particular encounter taking place. Now, the bit I didn't know about, I mean, I knew he was a contactee. I knew that part of it. I mean, he was only born like 16 miles down the road from where I'm sat now because he was born in Liverpool. So that's kind of local legendary stuff. But I didn't know that he'd actually been given an artifact. You've got to be careful with UFO legends because they're a bit like King Arthur. Sometimes extra bits get bolted on, so I would have to know where the source of that came from. I know all about the UFO encounter. Yes, I'm aware
Yeah.
of him having that and the circumstances.
That was twice, wasn't it, that he was visited? And they
Yes, I
asked him
believe. Yeah, I
they
believe
asked
so.
him to go with them.
Well, I know on the first visit it was quite dramatic. That's when there were other witnesses and this lady was with him, and people have done illustrations based on Lennon's own drawings. I mean, Lennon actually kept a record of it, and he drew the saucer and what have you. The second visit, I've got less information on the second visit. Again, if that's when they're claiming he was given an object. And again, I mean, shoot, it's a duck. I'm an archaeologist. What happened to the object? Where did that
Yeah.
finish up?
They
Where
said
is
he
it?
gave it to a friend. He gave it to a close friend, a musical friend. I think somebody mentioned his name and I forgot it, but they I don't think they're going to want to mention his name. But I want to go into how you got interested, I guess, way
Yeah,
back. And just like me, 13, 14 years old,
yeah.
you had your own, what kind of like UFO encounter. Could you tell us a little bit about that? That's where it
Okay,
started.
well, there's two of them, and
Okay.
it's probably worth mentioning. The first one was when I was 14, summer of 1976. That gives away my age.
Oh,
Over here, it
I'm
got really
older. It's
hot.
okay. It's okay.
I mean,
I'm old.
well, you guys out in America are used to hot. I mean, you know what hot is. You're used to things like baking the ground solid and all that. We're not over here. Summer of 1976, everything got baked. So I went out with two schoolmates and we went camping up at a local village near here called Antrobus. We decided we were going to have loads of fun, which we did. We were out for the weekend and we tried to pitch the tent. Now, obviously, in those days, canvas tents, you had to bang the pegs into the ground. Well, we didn't have a chance. Couldn't do it because the ground was fired clay, so it was like concrete. So we dumped the tent flat as a ground sheet, put the sleeping bags on top of it, and we ended up literally lying on top of the sleeping bags under the stars. Now, there's no light pollution where we were, and there's also in 1976 no satellites. There's nothing going round the planet on a regular basis that you can see like there is now. So I'm lying there. The other two lads have fell asleep, so I'm lying there in the middle of the night. I think something woke me up, probably a fox or something, and I'm lying there looking at the sky. Now the sky is immense. You can see the Milky Way, stars from horizon to horizon, and I just notice on the horizon that there's this slow moving star. coming towards me. I can see it coming, you know, across the sky. And I'm thinking, that's a bit weird. I wonder if it's a helicopter or a plane or something like that. It's early hours of the morning, so there it's coming across. It gets very close to being right over the top of me. And then all of a sudden it goes bang, 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 gone. And I'm sat there, I'm thinking, whoa, we haven't got anything that does that. You know, you can't stop and then fly back and to. You know, the G-forces would have annihilated anything inside a craft like that. And then it vanished. It didn't fly off. It didn't go anywhere else into the starfield. It just switched off. Mm-hmm. So that was the first encounter I ever had. So at that point, I'm then starting to pay attention. I'm beginning to, you know, read Flying Saucers Have Landed and Charity of the Gods and all. I'm paying a bit more attention, basically.
Another thing I want to mention in there while you're talking, in 1976, we didn't have that many satellites going around the Earth either.
No, that's the point. We hadn't even had close encounters of the third kind. That's late 70s, that's 77, 78. So the idea of UFOs, even as a concept, was not as big in the public eye. Anyway, you know, we went through all that, and then you get into the early 80s. I'm a bit older now, you know, I'm in the music business. I finished doing a session in a studio and I come to a local hill near here. I just drive up there in the early hours basically to unwind. So I'm looking out across the whole of the Mersey Valley and I see this thing come through the smoke on the power station. Now that sets the alarm bells ringing straight away because you're thinking, hang on a minute, that's not a helicopter. You don't fly a helicopter through steam coming off cooling towers. You know, you just don't do that. This thing comes through and it's got white lights going and then it's got blue and red. And they're changing colour like disco lights, and it's scanning the floor and it drops a bit as it comes out of the steam. So it's following the north bank of the River Mersey. And I see this come all the way up the Mersey Valley till it gets to Warrington, which is right in front of me. So it's coming from far left, it's coming to centre field. And as it comes up to the built up area, all of a sudden it just switches off. All the lights just go off at once, just in a blinding split second. And you could just make out the outline of this thing against the lights of the town. And it looks like a small truck, about the size of a small truck thing. Couldn't really see the shape. You could just see something there. This something then just goes boom, like that, straight up, vertically up, gone. Now, staggeringly, 13 years later, there's a Jenny Randall's book comes out. Jenny Randall's is a ufologist over here. She does this Mysteries of the Mid-Mersey Valley or Mysteries of the Mersey Valley, and it's got this thing on the cover. And apparently it was seen over on the Wirral, it was seen over in Liverpool, and it was seen heading for the power station. So I'd seen it come through and come up the valley. So you've got a bunch of witnesses. It was seen by pilots flying into Liverpool Airport. So you've got all these different witnesses. And then eventually in one of Philip's books, which is these UFO Untold Tales things, 2022, in one of Philip's books, I joined all of these stories together and I completed the account. The finished version of that account is in here. So we're back to that again.
That's good.
Finally, I've put it in writing. It's also on the 2008 video of Europe's Roswell as well, DVD. The DVD of Europe's Roswell, it's on there. It's on the director's cut. If you click on the director's cut, you get these interviews with me telling basically the same story, because that's all to say. But at that point, I already knew, you know, this was like a close encounters type, you know, one of their little scout craft type things that you see in the film. Hats off to Spielberg. I mean, boy, does he do his research. You know, when he did the Indiana Jones, you know, and the Crystal Skull, well, there you go. Crystal Skulls and Human Heads. Yeah. That's the other Philip Mantle book. Right. When I'd researched this, I realized that this basically is the research that he did for that movie. And it's got a lot of things based in fact. So if you want to kind of dash off and have a look at that one, that's on Flying Disc Press as well.
These billionaires, they rub shoulders with a lot of elites and a lot of top secret people that might give them some ideas, but they never tell. I mean, they belong to this good old boy network, and they find out. And that's what I'm saying. There's some realism in every movie. In Spielberg, Third Encounter, and everything else. You know, it's just, and The Fourth Kind. There's always some kind of realism in it. And I'm glad that you're getting into all this. You're enlightening people, and I really like that. Because you're letting people know ancient history, you're letting them know what's going on in our past. You're letting people know what's going on today with UFOs and some of the research that you've been doing. and you're an archaeologist, a musician, and I have to. Well, I don't want to take my hat off; it might blur the camera. My hat's off to you. Okay, theoretically.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, but tell us, Mark, where we can find your works and your books and some of the things that's on the internet.
Well, like everything else, I like to keep things really simple. All the books I've done, all 9 of them, are still in print, going all the way back to the 1990s. So if you want to look at local history, there's Celtic Warrington and Other Mysteries 1, 2, and 3. They're the first 3 books. There are bits about Arthur in those as well, some of which doesn't appear in the big book, actually. So, and then you can get the 3, you can get the Green Man, Robin Hood. It's Revealing the Green Man, Life and Times of the Real Robin Hood, and the Disappearing Ninth Legion. You can get those. And then you've got Crystal Skulls and Human Heads, Polychronicon of Merlin, Joseph and Arthur, and you're going to be able to get Europe's Roswell. All of them, the whole lot, everything, Amazon. Go to Amazon, find them all on Amazon, pay your money, a couple of days later, comes whizzing through the door. It's that simple. So just go and find me on Amazon.
And you narrator on an audiobook, right?
Yes, there's audiobook versions of most of them. If you really want to go and Google, you might find secondhand copies of the DVDs. There's one for Lost Treasures, which is a TV series, the first season. There's one for Rome's Lost Megafortress, which is a documentary we did for Sky. There's Europe's Roswell, that came out on DVD if you want to hunt for that. There's The Life and Times of the Real Robin Hood as a documentary, that's out there. So there's tons of stuff you can go looking. But again, Amazon, start on Amazon. It's that simple. If you want to get hold of me, if you want to contact me, send me a Facebook request. That's probably the easiest. And we can chat a bit on Messenger. And if you want to book me for your conferences or anything that's going on, UFO talks or radio interviews or anything like that, send me a message on Messenger and I'll give you my email and you can link up to me properly.
Well, I'll sure pass on to these other radio people.
Fantastic.
I've had contact with Uri Geller. I don't know if you know him. He might want to talk to you.
I had some communication with Uri Geller back in the 1980s when I ran a company back then, and we were going to team up and do something, but it didn't come off. But again, I mean, I've got an immense amount of respect for Uri and what he's done over the years in terms of standing up for the supernatural and the paranormal and abilities, human abilities in particular. He's got to be up there with Uri Geller. So by all means, pass on details.
I'll tell Uri, that you and I become chums on the internet and doing interviews, and he's in UFOs real heavy right now. Most of all of his postings in the past couple of months or so has been about disclosure, and he's got videos. He worked with the CIA, I guess he's been around a lot. He knows a lot of people. And I had him on my show a couple of years ago on when I was on Disclosure News Network. That was 2.5 years ago. And the producer of the show lost half of the show on record.
Oh.
He made a mishap on the recording of it. And there's the first half, but we kind of split because he wasn't the producer, and also he kind of, I was the main interviewer and he was my co-host in a way, but I asked him to send me that portion, but I've never gotten it. So he's probably ill. Nice guy, really nice guy. But no, Mark, Olly, I really appreciate you being on the show, and I'm sure that once people see you again, you got a good reception on the last show about a month or so ago, and I'm sure that the follow-up will be good. And I hope that all my viewers listen in on what you got to say, because you're a fantastically talented person. I mean, I thought I could play the guitar, I could play the drums. I went to school in journalism. I've been into the UFO thing deeply with ETs, a lot of experiences in the military, all this stuff. But when I run into a guy like you, I say, wow, my hat's off to you, buddy. I mean, wow, from archaeologist to a recording, guy, recording stuff more than like it, yeah.
At the end of the day, you only live, well, you only live this life once. You're only here for the time that you're here. So my attitude's always been, let's cram in as much as you possibly can and go flying through the pearly gates at the end going, wow, that was a rush. That's my view. Let's keep going as long as we can.
Yeah, I want to flame out. I don't want to smoke out.
Oh, yeah, totally.
So,
totally.
yeah, in reincarnation, we're going to come back. I guess we'll be something else different, but it all depends on how good we are.
I'm not even sure they're going to allow me back.
Well, no, but you got all the intelligence this time around. So next time around, they may not let you have all the intelligence that you have now, or the talents that you have now. And so you would just be a average person, next time around. Maybe we're supposed to experience different things from what I heard. And we're on
to be said for being average, believe me.
Yeah. And the average person is a good person.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the talking heads. They don't appreciate a lot of the average person's stories because they say pilots and police are better at interpreting what they see. Well, I say bull to that. I'm against a lot of these talking heads that won't accept other people's stories, experiences. I got experiences, I got good stories. I want them to come on the air and do an interview because but they're afraid. They're afraid of the ridicule. And you got trolls and you got everything else.
Well, yeah. In my case, I'm very much, how can I put it, science, evidence-based, physical, so, I mean, at the end of the day, that's not something you can argue with because it's not a matter of opinion. It's there, it's kind of shoot, it's a duck, which is what I said earlier, quacks like a duck, it looks like a duck, it's a duck. And I'm very much like that. There's, going back to the Gospel of Thomas, it's got this thing in it where it says, know that which is before your face and that which is hidden from you shall be revealed, which is basically saying if you're understanding what you're looking at, then you'll push past that and you'll get into the mysteries, and that's the moral. If there's a moral to the tale, that's what it is. Don't accept everything on face value, dig a bit and start, getting the evidence together. So yes, I do get criticism and trolls and all the rest of it, but it's difficult to argue with some of the things I'm presenting, shall we say that? When it comes down to it, I'm not the star of the show. The artifacts are, or the archaeology is, or the history is, or the subject that I'm dealing with. That's the star of the show at the end of the day, because when I'm dead and gone and miles away, these things are still going to be here for people to wrestle with. So that's the key. Yeah.
Your education is in science and archaeology, and that's more a solid footing. But me, being my education in journalism, they don't trust any journalists anymore.
No, so, I'm afraid not.
But I have to throw that aside and really tell the truth about my experiences. In my first book, I do that. What are they or who are they? Whatever you want to look at it. But that's my first book. But no. I really appreciate you, Mark, Olly, and I love talking to you. You're a jolly guy. You have a good attitude, but you're very intelligent and very talented. And I want to thank you for doing the show. And
absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Been listening to the Dave Emmons Show, and Mark Olly from the UK, marvelous guest, and a talented guy, and he's a drummer, just like I am. So there's a bond there, but he's actually going to, I made some recordings, but they never went anywhere, but oh, well, that's, you got to try, right, Mark?
Yeah.
And I want to thank everybody, and Mark, thank you very much for being on the show, Mark Olly, and good night, everybody, or good day whenever you hear this program. Thank you. Bye-bye.